Welcome back, everyone. This is the third video of the FlightFactor 777 version 2 feature guide series, and today I'm going to be talking about the communication system. Now, this is one of the features that really defines this add-on and makes it stand apart, whether for better or for worse. And the reason I say that is this is one of those features that really affects your day-to-day operations if you do enable it. You know, there's stuff like pushback feature, but that's not required. Whereas with communications, if it's enabled, you really have to know how to use it when you fly. Now, before we get started, I want to make a few disclaimers. First off, if you look in the top right corner of the screen, this was recorded in version 2.0.13 of the add-on, and it is an alpha build. So what this means is that although these features are somewhat mature in the process, they're still not final. There are a few things I will mention in this video that personally I'd like to see changed, and those may change between now and final release, and even in updates after that final release. Second, most of my experience with this comes from testing the aircraft. So I've also made posts on the forum asking the devs how certain things work or how certain features are supposed to go. However, this may not cover the entire depth of the feature. And if I miss something that relates to communications, feel free to post it in the comments. And finally, if you look in the top left, there's my frame rate. It's currently hovering around 21 to 23, 29, 30 if with occasional spikes. And this is because I am running on a laptop. So this is really dependent on your hardware configuration, and also remember that I am recording this on OBS, which does lower your frames quite a bit, so your mileage may vary, and please do not take this video as a performance benchmark of any sort. Anyways, with that out of the way, let's get into the cockpit. Now, the EFB is set to situations mode because that I use a custom starting setup for the aircraft, but that shouldn't have a factor in this. The first thing I want to talk about is the settings that affect this feature. And if you've seen the EFB video, most of your add-on specific settings and basically aircraft parameters are in simulation. So there are three things that affect the communications aspect. The first is ground operations. I will get into this later on, as it has more to do with a quirk of the system. However, these two on the right, crew interaction and voice, and subtitles, do affect the communications experience quite a bit. And so first thing, let's get into crew interaction and voice. And if you've come to this video just to disable the feature, I get it, not everyone wants to simulate this part of the add-on, and that's perfectly fine. You can disable communications with this first setting. So once you click it, boom, everything's grayed out. You don't have to worry anymore. However, if you do want to enable it, you have quite a few different features. First off, you have crew assistance, and this is where the crew checks what you're doing. So what I mean by that is if you request something wrong, they will call you out on it. So like if you're talking to the ground crew and you want to disconnect the GPU, for example, but you're still connected through the overhead panels and the aircraft is still pulling voltage from there, that is a dangerous situation. You have to disconnect it, the GPU through the overhead panel, like open the circuit before you disconnect the plug physically. And they will call you out on that if this is enabled. I like to keep it enabled. Second thing, if you don't want to hear the voices, which I get it, they are made from text to speech, and not everyone's a fan of that. Personally, I don't mind. But if you do mind and you want to mute it, you can absolutely mute it through there. If you do mute this, you will have to rely on the subtitles a lot of times. So just keep that in mind. Below this, there are a few grayed out options. I'll talk about that in a bit. And that brings us to manually control all service vehicles. Manually control all service vehicles is what I'd relate to the maintenance options. So for example, let's go back into general options and you have your maintenance type. Normally, you have auto call equipment set when it comes to ground equipment. What I mean is that if you call for loading, the purser is going to call the, let's say, the passenger gate for you, and you don't have to call the passenger gate yourself. Whereas, if you have manually control all service vehicles enabled, the purser's just not going to load anything. Like, nothing's going to happen. They're just going to say no, and they won't let you load anyone until that gate is connected. That is different from the maintenance type, because auto call equipment from the maintenance type is for the maintenance equipment. So they're not going to call the gate for you. They're going to call, let's say, the gear maintenance equipment for you. Whereas crew interaction is more of the cargo loaders or the gate. Below this is crew check frequency. And personally, I don't have that much experience with this. I believe it goes into the failure model of the aircraft and procedures. So this may not be fully implemented yet. However, if you do want to change this, it goes from 30 seconds all the way up to 300 seconds. And this is how often the crew will check on any situation. Below this is crew calls on start. This is only enabled when crew assistance is on. And what this does is, if you start the aircraft with engines running, the crew will call you as soon as the aircraft spawns in, just to say, you know, we're ready for takeoff, like, you can go ahead. Next, we have the crew call length, and this is the amount of chimes that beeps when the crew calls you. So for example, if you load the passengers, once they finish the loading, they're going to call you. The person is going to call you. And this setting determines how many chimes you will hear when they are calling. Normally, I would just set this to 1, but that's up to you. By default, it's on 3. Next up, we have First Officer Auto Performs Procedures. And this goes more into workflow and workload reduction. So this would be the aircraft determining if a certain procedure applies. So let's say you want to start up the engines, let's say, I don't know, change the ignition mode, and the first officer is going to detect that and he's going to do the rest of the procedure. Below this is voice recognition. I will discuss this later, near the end of the video. However, this does mean that if you enable this, you can give voice cues for, let's say, turn the battery switch on, or turn the APRU on, anything you would need. The following grayed out options are with First Officer Read Responses, and I wanted to leave them until now because they are only enabled when your First Officer speed is changed. So what is First Officer speed? First Officer speed is basically how long it takes for the First Officer to do things. So if they're doing procedures, this basically determines how slow they are and pressing buttons, or if they do it instantly. And these options are grayed out until you have the speed set at 3 seconds or more. So once 3 seconds is enabled, once you're at 3 seconds or more for the first officer speed, you can have the first officer read out what he's doing. So if they are saying battery on, they're going to say that as they press it. And once you enable this, you have the other two enabled. So, or the opportunity to enable these two. The first one is first officer reads responses. So let's say this would be on a checklist. So if they're doing a procedure and they're saying, oh, you need to turn the window heat on, you can have them either say window heat and just that's it, or window heat on, which would be the appropriate like response for that situation. To the next to this is reads all tasks. And this goes more into the electronic checklist function, because in both in the 777 at least, the electronic checklist has both automatic and manual tasks. So manual tasks are things you have to manually check off, whereas automatic is where the aircraft basically determines the state for you, and it automatically checks it for you. And if something is completed and the aircraft determines that it's in the correct state, in an automatic entry, it's going to turn green, and you don't have to read it out. Whereas normally it would be white if it's not in the required state. If you have this enabled, the first officer will read even the green lines in the procedure. That should be all of the crew interaction and voice options. This brings us to subtitle options. As you can see, there is a button here in crew interaction, but you can also go up to simulation and there is subtitles. Now in subtitles, you can select it to enabled or disabled. So if you disable it, you're not going to have any subtitles. Enabled, you'll have them. You can also change where they appear. I have them set to the bottom of my screen, so they show up around here in the center bottom. You can also have them show up on the top or middle of the screen. You can also change how long they are visible after the voice line plays before they fade out. You can keep the history of your subtitles. So what this means is that once you see subtitles and like there's multiple, you can actually go down to the subtitle and scroll up, and you will have your history of up to 100 subtitle lines. Below this is include oral alerts. So if this is enabled, the subtitles will also show for things like the GPWS, TCAS, also the RAS system. Yeah, when you have this enabled, it will show up as well. So you'll have different lines saying 50, 40, 30, 20 for the GPWS. On the right-hand side of options, there is the background, where you can change the background of the text to either be solid, translucent, or transparent. What I mean by this is the subtitles appear in a sort of box that takes up quite, I'd say, decent enough size of the screen, decent enough portion of the screen. However, if you want it to look a certain way, you can say, hey, I want transparent, I want translucent. You can do that. You can also change the font size, small, medium, large. I have not tested this, so I do not know what medium or large, what they look like. I just use small, that's the default, so I just keep it that way. There's also a number of lines visible, which is basically, yeah, how many lines are visible on the screen before it starts scrolling down. So that basically brings us to the communication system itself. And before I get to establishing comms, I want to talk about this little icon in the bottom right. So you can see there's a pilot icon, and you can disable this in general show info widget. You can see it's gone. You can enable that. And what this feature does is it tells you who you are in contact with. So let's say you want to establish communications with the ground crew. Once you start talking to them, a ground crew icon will appear here. And once you disconnect from the ground crew, like say when you're about to fly, you're done pushing back, that icon will disappear. And the same goes for the purser. With that in mind, let's just start up the aircraft, and I'll show you how to get started with communications. Now remember that I just set the physical time factor to 20, so it's gonna be... There we go, it's much faster than it should be. And here we go. Let me just change the view for this one. And here is your main interface, I'd say, for the communication system. FMC3, or FMS3, whatever you would call it. It's on the pedestal behind the forward two FMCs and behind the throttle quadrant. So there are 3 things, but 2 panels that you need in order to communicate. First off, you need electrical power. That's pretty much a given. But second, you have your audio panel, which needs to be set, and FMS or FMC3. So what do I mean by this? Let's go into communications. You can access it through cabin interphone. And you can see that you have these options, but a few are grayed out. Say, you want to contact the purser.
Did you forget the mic?
There we go. The first officer wants us to connect the mic. And this is where the audio panel comes in. Because for the audio panel, if you change it to say flight, you can see you can now contact the ground crew. If you change it to cabin, you can now contact the purser. If you change it to PA, you can do your PA. And if it's not in PA, it's grayed out. So that's something you need to know, especially if you're, I'd say, flying on VATSIM, because this audio panel does occasionally influence which frequencies you are transmitting on. But anyways, in order to establish communications, we've gone through the audio panel setup, we have electrical power, and so all you have to do is go into cabin interphone and click on ground crew. It's gonna chime a bit.
Good day, hope you are all doing well today.
Hi Captain, hear you loud and clear.
There we go. So now we are connected to the ground crew, and one thing you can notice is that in the bottom right, there is now an icon that shows the ground crew. So that brings us into the menu that we have for the ground crew. First off, you have hello. I'm not too sure why this is here, especially since you automatically call them once you select. So I'm not too sure why there's hello. But below this is loading. And this is where you would ask them to load or unload or retouch your cargo and fuel. So you'd normally set the weight and balance in the EFB anyways, and you can load it through the EFB. However, if you want to use the FMS3, this is where you'd go.
How can I help you?
Yeah, you can also request a fuel sample. Why not? Let's
We would
request
like
it.
to request a fuel sample test.
Roger that. You should have the answer within 2 or 3 hours. We'll let you know.
And there we go. So that's the loading page. Below this is the doors page. And this is where all of your, how do I say it? The external hatches that are most used for flight are. So what I mean by external hatches are on the ground level, where the ground crew are. So you have your forward, aft, and bulk cargo. So these are the cargo doors. You also have your equipment access and accessory hatches. I'm not too sure what they're called in the real aircraft. Below this, well, I'd say below, but after these, the ones without the dots, are all of the ground equipment you can call. So you have GPU 1, GPU 2, chocks.
Listening?
Note that if they are already connected, they will show up as green. Same thing in second page, you can call the bus, pneumatic, which is your air starter, the loader forward and aft for your cargo, engine maintenance. This is basically all of your ground equipment. However, on the third page is where I'd say your global controls are. So if you want to say remove all equipment, this is what that button does. It removes all equipment. You have to be disconnected from the aircraft has to be disconnected from these equipment before they can remove it, but once you're done, you can remove them all through here. You can also have them close all of the hatches. Let's say you want to pressurize the aircraft. That will close all of the hatches and also remove the personnel. If you only want to remove the personnel, you can request the crew to move away from the aircraft. And if you want to disconnect from the ground personnel, this is the button here. Now that is the ground crew. This brings us to the purser. The purser handles...
This is the captain. How do you hear?
Good day. Ready over here.
Okay, so as I was saying, the purser handles all of the services that happen in the actual cabin or main deck, I'd say. So first off, you can do PA calls. These public announcement calls are different from the menu on like this PA call menu, because in this one, in the purser tab, it would be the purser who's doing the announcements, whereas in the PA call button, that would be you as the captain doing those announcements. So you have welcome, safety, climb, on ground, emergency, evacuate, all of that stuff. Below this, you have doors, and this is where all of your doors are. You can close L1, L2. In the 200ER, it should be L3, R3, and L4, R4, because there are only 4 doors. In the 300ER, it's going to be L1, L2, L3, L4, L5, because there are 5 doors on each side. But for the 200ER, yeah, I believe the devs should change this numbering. However, if you want to close all of the doors, you can see that there is a second page.
Sir.
And in the second page is where your close all button is. And remember, this only closes all of the doors on the cabin, at the cabin level. So it's not going to close your cargo hatches, it's not going to close any hydraulic panels. It is only going to close what the purser has control of. Next up, in the purser menu, we have emergency ops, and this enables you to deploy the evacuation slides. So say you have all of the doors closed and armed. If you look at the, let's say, I think it's best if I just explain it. If you have all the doors closed and armed, but you're not in emergency ops, the doors are just going to be grayed out. You can't open them, nothing's gonna happen. So you need to
How can I help you?
You need to declare emergency ops, and only when you do will the option to open those doors be enabled through the EFB or the FMS, and those will deploy slides if you do that. Below this is the loading options, and this is what goes on with the cabin, the cabin level. So you have your passengers and your catering. So remember, fuel and cargo is with the ground crew, passengers and catering are with the purser. Next, you have your standard calls, cabin crew prepare for takeoff, prepare for landing. You can arm your doors through here. When they are armed, it's going to switch to say doors man, and you can also disarm your doors from there. You can also call for a coffee.
Would you like something?
Which, yeah, why not? Let's test it. There we go. If we say, hey, get me a coffee, please.
A cup of coffee.
Not likely.
And the purser does not want to. That's completely fine. There are times where this happens, however, there are also times where the purser does give you coffee. You can also ask for a crew meal as well.
Thank you very much.
So aside from that, there is company. I believe this goes to the data link features, which aren't fully implemented, and so you cannot access company for now. You can also do all call, which is the same as the public announcements. And you have directory. So directory is where you can call different things. So let's say I want to call the cabin crew at door 2 left. I don't know why you would, but here it would be.
I am sorry, but I can't help you.
See, they're not very helpful. You can also call different parts of the aircraft, basically. Yeah. Anyways, that was the establishing communications and menus in the FMS 3. Now let's go to the EFB, because an important thing that I want to mention is that when communications are enabled, the EFB does not bypass it. So what do I mean by this? What I mean by this is, let's say you want ground service. Normally, if your communications are enabled, you'd probably expect clicking on the bus to just immediately spawn in the bus with the proper loading time. However, with communications enabled in the FlightFactor, you'll see when I click the bus.
Ground? We need some equipment connected.
What can I bring you?
Bus?
Roger.
So you can see it automatically switches the mic to ground crew, and it calls the ground crew. So this just goes to show that the EFB is more of an alternative UI instead of a bypass. Next thing I want to show is some of the quirks in communications. We're almost done. I just want to show some quirks and voice control, and we'd be solid. First off, if a ground personnel or the purser calls you, how do you answer? You can do this by using the call queue here. So for example, let's load some passengers in. Why not? First class. Let's just load them in. Remember that the EFB is just an alternative interface, and so when I call for this to be loaded, they will still use the audio panel.
You may board the aircraft now.
Yes, sir. We'll ask passengers to board immediately.
And once it's done, you're gonna hear the chimes. There we go. You can see that, so you can hear that I only got one chime because I set that a while ago. But there's also something new that pops up. There's call queue, purser, and clear queue. So if you want to answer the purser, you just have to click here, and they'll play the voice lines. If there are any other calls queued in, it's going to change. Either it's going to remain purser, or it's going to change the ground crew or something. Or you could just decline everything and clear your queue. In this case, we're going to call the queue. We're going to use the call queue.
I am all ears.
Sir, we have completed the boarding.
Thank you.
And there we go. We have completed the boarding. So that's how you answer any calls. And the second queue, the second quirk I want to show has to do with the ground equipment. So this is where our ground operations comes in. And that has to do with connecting via the gate. So if you change it to gate, you can see that in ground service, it's gate. You can see that the stairs are gone. However, when you go to the FMS3,
I am here.
like, you can see that this option still says stairs. And when you call for stairs,
We require some equipment.
What can I bring you?
Passenger stairs.
captain says
Very
stairs.
well, sir. Can I help you with anything else?
He's asking a question. Can we help? Can you help with anything else? I'd say no.
Thanks,
It's fine.
but no thanks.
And since you heard stairs, you'll see they connected stairs. Now, this is a quirk with the system that I believe the devs should change, because as you can see, we've changed the option to gate. It's still great here. If we click it,
Ground? We need some equipment connected.
What can I call for you?
Passenger gate.
Of course, sir.
captain says passenger gate. So yeah, I believe it's something that should be changed. But as of the time being, if you want to use the gate, you'd need to use the EFB, unfortunately. And you also do have to set the connect via gate in ground operations. And this brings us to the final portion of this video, which has to do, of course, with voice recognition. Now, voice recognition, if you want to use it, there are quite a few things you need to set up. First off, of course, you need to enable it in the aircraft. That's a given. Second, you need to have a key binding set. So in X-Plane, there we go. This is the key binding you need. It's one SIM, voice recognition, start recognition session. I set it to my return key, and the reason I did that is this is a push to talk button. And so you need to hold it down while you are using it. And for me, this was just the most ergonomic position for me. One of the things I want to note is that this system is unfortunately based on specific commands, and those need to be spoken out in full verbatim. So word per word, you need to say it all. Fortunately, FlightFactor has these commands in. It's in your aircraft folder. So it's FlightFactor / Boeing 777-200ER / docs. So it's in the documents folder. And it is a file called voice commands. And in this file, you'll see it's separated into two sections, main and first officer. Now, everything in main are commands that you can say from the get-go. So let's do checklist. So I'm just gonna hold down the button and say checklist.
Pre-flight checklist.
Oxygen.
There we go. So since it's in main, you can see it's in main checklist. I can say it from the get-go, and they're going to pop up the checklist. Everything's gonna be fine. By the way, this is what I mean as well for the open cycle, closed cycle options. These are already green because they are set from the get-go, whereas normally,
Before start, checklist, please.
see, these would be white.
Flight deck door.
And these are your manual options, but I'll get more into that in a future video. Now, we have the main options. However, for your first officer commands, you need to first say first officer. Now, this is... I'm not too sure how to feel about this implementation. I'd much rather use a keyword system, so something that would make things more dynamic, and I'll demonstrate this issue right now. So let's say in main, you can say APU on, APU off. Okay, let's do this. Let's say APU on. And they just straight up start it up. Okay, so this is the entire process. They just straight up start the APU. If you want to have it in a certain position, however, you need to go first officer and go down to APU selector, start on or off. And this also goes into some of the weirder things, I'd say, such as where you would need to say the commands in full and exactly. So let's say APU generator switch engage or switch on. Honestly, you could probably just say APU generator on or APU generator off, but the FlightFactor needs you to include that switch. And personally, I would not be... I think it's just needs to be better implemented. So anyways, let's do a long one just to show a bit of why I'm not too much of a fan of this specific part of it. So if I can't just say left side window heat switch on, which by itself is a bit long, I need to first say first officer. So first officer. First officer.
How can I help?
Left side window heat switch on.
Left side window heat switch on.
See, and it... I believe there could just be a more efficient interpretation or implementation. However, this is how the system works right now. Anyways, that should be everything with the aircraft communication systems. In the next video, I'm going to be talking about the walk-around feature, some of the modeling quirks that goes on in this aircraft, because there are a lot of things that are physically modeled that honestly they're pretty amazing. And we will also be talking about configurations, so stuff like cabin configurations and cargo configurations. So that will be the next video, but for now, thank you so much for watching. I hope this has been helpful for you, and I'll see you in the next video.